Good evening, dear friend, wherever you are tonight. Welcome back. Tell me, where are you listening from? And what time is it there? I love hearing from you all. Tonight, we continue our journey through the timeless tales of 1001 Nights. Stories whispered beneath desert stars, where adventure, magic, and mystery await. So relax, breathe softly, and let the story unfold. The story of Sinbad the Sailor. Scheherazade began her tale. Your Majesty, it is said that during the reign of Caliph Harun al-Rashid, there lived in Baghdad an old porter named Hindbad. One scorching day, as the sun blazed mercilessly above the roofs of the city, Hindbad labored under the weight of a great burden, carrying it from one end of Baghdad to the other. His back ached, his breath came short, and yet the road stretched endlessly ahead. At last, he turned into a shaded street where the breeze was cool and the stones had been sprinkled with rosewater. Grateful for so fair a place to rest, he set down his load and sat upon it beside a splendid mansion. Sweet scents drifted from the open windows, incense mingled with rose and amber. From within came the strains of gentle music, and beyond that, the singing of nightingales and other bright-throated birds that filled the gardens of Baghdad. The fragrance of roasted meats and delicate spices reached him, and he knew that a feast was being held within. Curiosity stirred in his weary heart. Who could live in such magnificence? He seldom passed this way and did not know the house. So he went to the gate where servants in fine garments stood, and he asked one of them whose dwelling this was. "Why, old man," said the servant with a smile, "do you live in Baghdad and not know? This is the palace of Sinbad the Sailor, the great voyager who has crossed all the seas of the earth." Now Hindbad had heard many a tale of Sinbad's wealth, and envy began to burn within him. He lifted his eyes to heaven and cried aloud so that all nearby could hear, "O Lord, look upon the difference between Sinbad and me. Each day I toil and sweat beneath heavy burdens just to earn a crust of coarse black bread, while this fortunate man bathes in luxury and ease. What has he done to deserve such fortune? And what have I done to be left in misery?" Having spoken thus, he stamped the ground in anger and despair. As he lamented, a servant came forth from the mansion, took him gently by the arm, and said, "My master Sinbad, hearing your words, desires to speak with you. Please come inside." Hindbad was startled and afraid. He thought, "Surely I have offended this great man, and now he will have me punished." He tried to excuse himself saying he could not abandon his load in the street. But the servant assured him that others would watch over it. At last, the porter followed reluctantly. He was led into a vast hall where many guests were seated at a table spread with rare dishes and golden goblets. In the place of honor sat a noble gentleman with a long beard and wise eyes, none other than Sinbad himself. The sight of such splendor made the poor man tremble, and he bowed low before the host. Sinbad greeted him kindly, bade him sit at his right hand, and with his own hands offered him food and wine. When all had eaten their fill, the sailor turned to his guest and said, in the friendly manner of the Arabs, "Brother, tell us your name and trade." "My lord," replied the porter humbly, "I am called Hindbad." "Brother Hindbad," said Sinbad, "I am glad to see you here, and all my companions rejoice likewise. But tell me, will you repeat the words you spoke just now in the street?" Hindbad's heart sank. He bowed his head and answered, "My lord, I was weary and overcome with toil. My tongue slipped and spoke foolishly. I beg your pardon." "Do not fear," said Sinbad with a gentle laugh. "I bear you no ill will. Indeed, I pity you. Yet you are mistaken if you think that I gained this comfort without labor or peril. The life I enjoy was bought with many years of hardship and danger such as few men could endure. I swear to you, the sufferings I have known would turn the boldest adventurer away from the sea forever. You have perhaps heard faint rumors of my 7 voyages, and of the strange lands and fearful trials I met upon the waters of the world. Since fate has brought us together this day, I shall recount them faithfully, that you and all who sit here may hear the truth of Sinbad the Sailor." And before beginning his tale, he sent word that the porter's burden should be delivered to its rightful place, so that the old man might listen in peace. Then, when all was ready, Sinbad began to speak. The first voyage of Sinbad the Sailor. I was born to a family of great fortune, yet in my youth I wasted it all on foolish pleasures and careless living. But mercy came to me before ruin did. One day I awoke from my folly, as though from a fevered dream. When I thought upon my ways, I saw that wealth, like the morning dew, vanishes beneath the sun of idleness. Riches are a fragile friend, time a treasure easily lost, and I feared that age, when it comes empty-handed, is the hardest burden a man may bear. Then I remembered the words my father once spoke, echoing those of the wise King Solomon. Better to rest in the grave than to live in want. So I gathered what remained of my estate and sold it all at the market. With the money, I sought counsel from honest seafarers and merchants, men who had learned wisdom from the winds. Their words lit a fire in me, and I resolved to trade across the seas. Once decided, I delayed not a single hour. I journeyed to Basora, where many merchants were preparing a ship. Together, we shared the cost and set our sails eastward, across the shining waters of the Persian Gulf, the sea that lies between the happy shores of Arabia and the dark mountains of Persia. Beyond it stretched the wide Indian Sea, where the winds whisper of distant kingdoms and the coasts of Abyssinia lie in shadow. At first, I was sick with the rolling of the waves, but in time, I grew strong, and from that hour, I was never again troubled by the sea. We landed on many islands, buying and trading fine goods. One day, the wind fell still, and our ship drifted toward a small green isle, low upon the water, carpeted with grass and shining in the sun. The captain cast anchor and bade us rest. We went ashore with laughter and food and wine, but as we feasted, the ground beneath us trembled. The island heaved and groaned, and those upon the ship cried out in terror, "Hasten back! It is no island. It is a great whale." In a moment, all was confusion. Some leapt into the boats, others plunged into the waves. I, poor fool, lingered too long. The creature plunged beneath the sea, and I was thrown into the raging water. I caught hold of a floating plank and clung to it through the night, tossed from wave to wave, praying to see the dawn once more. When morning broke, my strength was gone. Just as I despaired, a mighty wave cast me upon a rocky shore. Roots clung to the cliff like the fingers of fate, and by them I dragged myself up from death. There I lay upon the sand, between life and dream, until the sun rose high. Though faint with hunger and weariness, I gathered what little strength I had and searched for herbs to eat. I found a few green leaves, and by great blessing, a spring of sweet water that revived my soul. When I could walk again, I wandered inland without path or purpose until I came to a wide plain. There stood a horse, grazing peacefully. Fear and hope battled in my heart. Was this the end of me, or the beginning of my deliverance? As I drew near, I saw it was a mare, tethered to a stake. Her beauty was wondrous to behold. While I gazed, I heard a sound from beneath the earth, a man's voice calling out. Soon he appeared, asking who I was. I told him my tale of shipwreck and despair. He took my hand kindly and led me into a cavern where other men sat. They marveled to see me. As I marveled at them, they fed me and told me they were grooms of King Mihraj, Lord of the island. Each year, they brought the king's mares here and fastened them thus, to lure the great sea stallion that rises from the deep. When he covers a mare, they drive him back with loud cries before he devours her. The foals born of these unions, they said, are called seahorses, swift and strong, and are kept for the king alone. While they spoke, the sea stallion rose, vast and terrible. He covered the mare, then turned to rend her, but the men shouted so fiercely that he fled to the depths again. The next day they gathered the mares and led them home, taking me with them. When we reached the royal city, they brought me before King Mihraj. He listened with compassion to my story and ordered that I be clothed, fed, and cared for. His kindness was as deep as the sea that had nearly swallowed me. I praised his nobility and the faithfulness of his servants. In time, I befriended the merchants and scholars of the land, speaking often with travelers from distant ports. The king's city stood beside a harbor, bright with ships from every realm. Yet I never forgot my home in Baghdad, and longed for the day I might return. One evening, the king told me of another island under his rule, the Isle of Qasem, where each night drums of bronze were said to sound from unseen hands. Sailors swore that spirits dwelt there. Eager to behold such wonder, I went. There I saw fish longer than 100 cubits, gentle yet fearful, that fled at the slightest noise, and others small as a man's arm, with heads like owls, whose strange faces still haunt my dreams. One evening, as I was walking by the harbor, a ship came slowly into port. When its anchor was cast and the ropes were drawn tight, sailors began to unload the cargo, and merchants bustled about to claim their goods. Curious, I glanced over the crates and bundles, reading the names painted on them, and there, my heart leapt. I saw my own name written in bold letters. I looked closer, and there could be no mistake. These were the very chests I had sent aboard when I departed from Basra. I even recognized the captain himself, believing he must think me long dead. I approached him quietly and asked, "Captain, tell me, to whom do those crates belong?" He answered, "Once there was a merchant from Baghdad named Sinbad. When our ship neared what seemed to be an island, he and many others went ashore to explore. But the island was no island. It was a sleeping whale, vast as a mountain. When it felt the heat of the fire they had lit upon its back, it stirred, shuddered, and plunged deep into the sea. Most of the men drowned where they stood. Poor Sinbad was among them. Those crates you see are his. I planned to sell them, and if I should ever meet a kinsman of his, return both the profit and the capital." "Captain," said I, bowing low, "I am that Sinbad, the man you thought perished still stands before you. Those chests are my own." At this the captain cried, "Heavens above! Whom can a man trust?" I saw Sinbad with my own eyes sink beneath the waves, and all the passengers can testify to it. And now you claim to be he? What deceit! You look honest enough, but your words, what trickery is this? Would you dare to claim a treasure that is not yours? "Please, good captain," I answered gently, "be patient and hear me out." He folded his arms. "Very well," said he. "Speak, and I shall listen." Then I told him all that had befallen me, how I was spared from death, found by the horsemen of King Mirage, and brought before the royal court. As I spoke, his suspicion softened. Before long, the truth of my tale shone clear, for many of his sailors came forward and recognized me as the same Sinbad they had thought lost. There was great rejoicing. At last the captain embraced me, exclaiming, "Praise be to the Almighty, who saved you from so dreadful a fate. Your goods are yours once more. Take them, friend, and do with them as you will." I thanked him deeply and praised his honesty. To honor his virtue, I offered him a share of my finest goods, but he refused. Then I chose the most precious items among my cargo and presented them to King Mirage, who rejoiced to see me safe. When I told him the strange story of how I had recovered my lost fortune, the king was delighted and returned my gifts with treasures even greater. Soon after, I took my leave, rejoined the same ship, and traded my remaining wares for local riches. Aloes wood, sandalwood, camphor, nutmeg, cloves, pepper, and ginger. We sailed past many isles and at last reached Basra. My cargo was worth 100,000 sequins. My family came running to meet me, overjoyed beyond words. I bought land, built a fine house, and filled it with servants and songs. At last, I thought, I would rest and forget the hardships of the sea, living in peace for all my days. Here, Sinbad paused, and the musicians resumed the melody he had interrupted with his tale. Wine and laughter flowed until evening fell. When the time came to part, Sinbad called for a purse of 100 sequins and handed it to the porter, saying, "Take this, my friend, Hindbad. Go home now and return tomorrow, for I shall tell you the story of my second voyage, a tale even stranger than the first." The porter went away, astonished and grateful, his heart filled with wonder. That night, he told his family what had happened, and they all gave thanks to God for the kindness of Sinbad the Sailor. The next morning, Hindbad dressed himself neatly and returned to the merchant's grand house. Sinbad greeted him warmly as a friend and welcomed him to the feast. When all the guests had eaten their fill, Sinbad rose and spoke to them. "My friends," said he, "if it please you, listen now to the story of my second voyage, one filled with perils greater still, and marvels beyond imagining." Then all fell silent, and Sinbad began his tale. The second voyage of Sinbad the Sailor. After my first voyage, I resolved to spend the rest of my days in quiet peace within the city of Baghdad. As I had told you, kind listeners, the night before. Yet peace, when it lasts too long, becomes a heavy cloak. My heart grew restless again, and the sea began to whisper my name. The desire for distant shores and the call of trade returned stronger than ever. So I gathered goods fit for a merchant's journey, joined a company of honest traders I had come to trust, and together we boarded a fine ship, entrusting our fate to God and to the winds. We sailed from island to island, trading profitably and living well. One day, we came upon a lush island filled with fruit trees and cool streams, yet strangely deserted. We went ashore to rest, wandering across meadows and along brooks that sparkled like strings of glass. There was no house, no voice, no smoke from any hearth, only bird song and the soft murmur of water. While my companions gathered flowers and fruit, I laid out my simple meal beside a shady stream. Bread, dried figs, and a small flask of wine. After eating, I grew drowsy and fell asleep in the soft grass. When I awoke, the sky had changed color. The breeze was still, and the ship was gone. I ran to the shore in disbelief. No trace of my companions remained. Only far out on the horizon, a tiny white sail glimmered before it vanished completely. My heart sank. I called, I cried, I cursed my folly for leaving the comforts of home. I rolled upon the ground in despair, scolding myself for not being content with my first adventure. But regret is a cruel friend. It comes too late. At last, I bowed to the will of God and sought some way to survive. Climbing a tall tree, I scanned the island. To the sea, there was nothing but blue emptiness. Yet inland, far away, something pale and round caught my eye. I climbed down, gathered the little food I had left, and set out toward the strange, white shape. As I drew nearer, it revealed itself to be a great, smooth sphere, so vast that it took me 50 paces to circle it. It had no opening, no seam, and its surface was slick as marble. The sun began to sink, and suddenly the daylight dimmed, as though a dark cloud had passed before it. I looked up, and my blood froze. Descending from the heavens was a monstrous bird, its wings wide enough to cover the valley in shadow. Then I remembered the sailors' tales of the giant rock, and I knew that what I had found was none other than one of its eggs. The great bird settled upon it, spreading its wings like a storm cloud. Quickly, I unwound my turban and tied myself to its leg, thinking that when it flew again, it might carry me away from this forsaken isle. And indeed, when dawn broke, the rock rose mightily into the air, bearing me upward until the earth was only a mist below. Then, with terrifying speed, it plunged down into a deep valley. My head spun. The wind roared in my ears. When the bird landed, I loosed the knot and rolled aside just in time to see it seize a huge serpent in its beak and soar away. I found myself alone once more in a valley so deep and narrow that the mountaintops vanished into the clouds. The walls were steep and sheer, impossible to climb, but the ground glittered strangely beneath me. I bent down and gasped. It was strewn with diamonds, bright as stars. My wonder turned to fear, for soon I saw that the valley was also home to monstrous serpents, thick as tree trunks and long enough to swallow an elephant whole. They hid in their caves by day, fleeing the rock that preyed upon them, and came forth only at night. As the sun fell, I took refuge in a narrow cave, rolled a stone across the entrance, and waited in terror while the valley hissed and writhed outside. All night, I heard the slithering of scales and the dreadful rasp of tongues against stone. I did not sleep. When morning came, the serpents retreated. I crept out, trembling. Diamonds lay at my feet, but I scarcely glanced at them. I ate what remained of my food, and exhaustion overcame me. I fell asleep upon the glittering ground. A thunderous thud woke me. A great lump of raw meat had fallen beside me. Then another, and another, tumbling from the cliffs above. In that moment, I understood the truth of the sailor's old tales. This was indeed the Valley of Diamonds. The merchants who coveted its jewels could never descend to fetch them, for no man could climb down those sheer walls. Instead, they threw great pieces of meat into the valley. The diamonds stuck to the flesh, and when the rocks carried the meat back to their nests, the men would frighten the birds away and gather the precious stones. And so, an idea was born in my heart, a wild hope. If the rocks could lift meat from the valley, perhaps they could lift me as well. I filled my leather satchel with the largest diamonds I could find, then bound one of the great pieces of meat around my body, tying it tight with my turban cloth. Thus wrapped, I lay flat upon the ground, praying for deliverance and trusting once more in the hand of Providence. I had scarcely lain down in that strange place when a shadow crossed the sun. a flock of mighty eagles descended from the heavens, each clutching a piece of meat in its claws. The strongest of them seized the very piece that wrapped around me, and with a single beat of its wings, carried me high into the sky. Up and up we rose until the wind itself seemed to thin. At last, the bird alighted in its nest upon a jagged mountain peak. From far below, I heard the cries of merchants. They shouted and clattered stones together, hoping to frighten the bird into dropping its prey. Terrified, the eagle released me and flew away. A merchant soon climbed to the spot, and seeing me instead of treasure, stood frozen with astonishment. Yet, when he found his tongue, he scolded me, declaring that I had stolen what belonged to him. "Friend," said I, "if you knew who I was, you would speak with a kinder heart. Be at ease. I have diamonds enough for both of us, more than all your companions could gather in a lifetime. What they find by chance, I have chosen myself from the depths of the valley." I showed him my small leather bag, and his eyes widened at the sight. Soon the other merchants gathered round, marveling not only at the stones, but at the daring trick that had saved my life. They praised both my wit and my courage, and they took me with them to their dwelling among the cliffs. There, I opened my bag before them. Gasps filled the air, for the diamonds were so large that none among them had ever seen such jewels, not even in the courts of kings. I told the merchant, whose eagle had borne me away, to choose whatever he wished, as much as he pleased. But he took only a single stone, modest in size. "This one is enough," said he. "It will free me from hardship and wandering. I shall work no more and travel no farther." That night, I slept among my new companions, retelling my tale for those who had not heard it. Joy filled me. Joy and disbelief, for I felt as though I had awakened from a dream. Safe at last from peril, the merchants had long been casting meat into the valley, and now, each satisfied with his share of diamonds, we made ready to depart. The next day, we set out together, passing over high mountains where strange, serpent-like creatures dwelt. Serpents so long that we trembled merely to see their shadows. Though fortune kept us from harm, at last we reached a harbor and sailed to the island of Roha, where the trees yield the precious camphor resin. Some of these trees were so vast that 100 men could rest beneath their shade. The resin flowed from hollows in their trunks into bowls, where it hardened, but once drained, the great trees withered and died. There, too, lived the rhinoceros, smaller than an elephant, yet mightier than a buffalo, with a single horn upon its nose as long as a man's arm. Upon that horn were pale markings, like the shape of a human face. The beast fought the elephants, piercing their bellies and sometimes lifting them high upon its head. But when the elephant's blood and fat poured over its eyes, the rhinoceros would fall blind. And then, wonder of wonders, the great rock birds would swoop down and carry both beasts away to feed their young. Many more marvels could I tell of that island, but I fear to weary your ears. There I traded a few of my diamonds for fine goods, and with the merchants I journeyed through many lands until we came at last to Basra, and from there to Baghdad. When I reached my home once more, I gave freely to the poor, and from the rest of my riches I lived in peace and comfort. And so ended my second voyage. Sinbad ordered 100 sequins to be given to the porter Sinbad and invited him to return the next day, when he would tell of his third great journey. The guests departed. The next day, at the same hour, all returned, even the poor porter, whose hunger and hardship had now faded into memory. They feasted together, and when the tables were cleared, Sinbad rose and said, "Now, my friends, lend me your ears once more, for I shall tell you the tale of my third voyage." The third voyage of Sinbad the Sailor. Before long, the peaceful life made me forget the dangers I had faced on my 2 earlier voyages. Being in the flush of youth, I grew weary of ease, dreaming with a foolish eagerness of the fresh perils I might yet meet. I left Baghdad with many costly local goods that I had bought and took them to Banzora. There I boarded a ship with several other merchants. We set out upon a long sea voyage, stopping at many ports to trade great loads of cargo. One day, while we were far out upon the waters, a violent storm struck and drove us from our course. The tempest held us for days. The wind at last blew our vessel before the harbor of an island. The captain prayed we might steer clear of that place, but we were forced to drop anchor in the harbor. When the sail had been furled, the captain warned us, "This island and its neighbors are home to a race of wild folk, hairy from head to foot. They will come upon us. Though they are small in stature, we must not resist them, for they swarm like locusts. Remember, if we slay a single one, the rest will rush upon us and make an end of us all." His words filled every man on board with dread. In short time, we learned the truth of his warning. A countless host of ugly, savage creatures appeared, their bodies thick with coarse hair, their faces fierce, and scarcely taller than a man's. 2 hands laid one upon the other. They leapt into the sea and swam toward us. Within moments, they had surrounded our ship. They drew near and spoke in strange cries we could not understand. Clinging to the bulwarks and the rigging, They scrambled aboard from every side, nimble and swift, as if their feet touched nothing at all. We watched them with a horror you might imagine. None dared to struggle or speak for fear that any sound might bring worse upon us. Indeed, they loosened our ropes and cut away our anchor, making no bother to weigh it. After pressing the vessel close to shore, they drove us all ashore. Then they took the ship to the island where they dwelt. Seafarers, ever since, avoid that place. To stop there is peril, as you have heard. Yet we had no choice but to endure our ill fate. We went inland, gathering what fruits and leaves we could to prolong the last hours of our lives, for we were certain death awaited us. As we wandered, we spied in the distance a great building and hurried toward it. It was a tall, skillfully built castle. A double door of black wood opened at our touch. We stepped into a courtyard. Before us stood a wide hall. On one side lay a heap of human bones, and on the other, many spits for turning meat. We shuddered at the sight, but so weary were our limbs that they gave way beneath us. We fell upon the earth, overcome with terror, and lay there as though dead for a long while. The sun set. While we lay in that miserable state, the hall's door burst open. There appeared the hideous face of a monstrous being as tall as a palm tree. It had but one great eye in the middle of its brow, glowing like a coal. Its teeth were long and sharp, jutting from a mouth as wide as a horse's muzzle. Its lower lip hung down to its chest. 2 ears, like those of an elephant, framed its shoulders. Its nails were keen and long as the talons of the largest birds. Seeing such a dreadful giant, we swooned and lay like corpses. When we came to, we saw the monster seated under the eaves. It fixed that single, blazing eye upon us, and after staring its fill, came close and seized me by the scruff of the neck, lifting me as one lifts a sheep's carcass. Turning me this way and that, it judged me, and finding me but skin and bone, dropped me. It took each of the others in turn, handling them the same. The captain, being the fattest among us, it took up gently with one hand as if he were a sparrow, and with the other it thrust a spit straight through him. Then it kindled a great fire, roasted the captain upon the spit, and carried him into the inner chamber to sup. When its feast was done, it returned to the outer hall and lay down to sleep, snoring like thunder until morning. We, meanwhile, could not close an eye, spending the night in the sharpest fear. At dawn, the giant rose and went out, leaving us shut in the castle. When we believed it far away, we broke the long silence with cries and lamentations that echoed through the halls. Though we were many and had but one foe, at first we did not think to kill it. True, the task was difficult, yet it was the only thing to be done. We debated many schemes and decided none, leaving our fate to heaven. All day we searched the island for herbs and fruit as before. At evening, we sought shelter from the damp, but found none, and were forced back to the castle. The giant returned. It devoured yet another of our number, then rolled once more upon its back and snored until morning. Then it went out again and left us as the day before. Our condition grew so grim that many among us chose rather to fling themselves into the sea than await such a horrible death. They urged their comrades to follow, but one of our company spoke up. We must not kill ourselves. If death comes, let it at least be by our own design. We should try to free ourselves from this savage. He is killing us slowly and wretchedly. A plan sprang into my mind, and I told it to the others. They agreed. I said, "Brothers, you know the shore is full of wood. If you will do as I propose, let us make rafts that will carry us. When they are finished, we will leave them at the water's edge, ready for use. In the meantime, we shall attempt the stratagem I have in mind to rid us of the giant. If it succeeds, we may wait until some ship comes to carry us from this cursed isle. If it fails, we will leap onto the rafts and paddle out to sea at once. I admit that trusting our lives to frail rafts upon a rough sea risks drowning. Yet would you prefer that to being locked inside the belly of the beast that has already eaten 2 of our fellows?" My proposal met with approval, and we set to work at once, making rafts for 3 men apiece. That same evening, we returned to the castle. Soon the giant came again, and we were forced to watch it roast another man. But in the end, we took our revenge thus. After its foul supper, it lay upon its back and slept. As it snored, the 9 boldest of us and I each took a spit, heated the points red in the fire, and then together thrust them into its eye to pierce it. The giant gave a terrible cry that shook the stones of his dark hall. He leapt to his feet and groped wildly about, hoping to seize one of us and crush us in his fury. But we had already slipped away, lying flat upon the cold ground where his hands could not reach. When he found no one, he began to stumble toward the door, howling dreadful sounds that echoed through the night. We fled from the castle and made for the shore, where our rafts were waiting. There we hid until dawn, fearing the giant might return with others of his kind. We agreed that if morning came and no voice was heard, we would believe him dead and dare to return to the island. Yet, as soon as the first light touched the sea, we saw him, alive, and worse, 2 other giants beside him, huge as mountains, with many more following behind. At that sight, we did not hesitate. We leapt upon our rafts and rowed with all our strength toward the open water. The giants, seeing us escape, seized great stones and waded into the sea up to their waists, hurling the rocks with dreadful aim. One after another, our rafts were shattered, and all those aboard were swallowed by the waves. Only my companions and I escaped, rowing desperately until the sea carried us beyond the reach of their wrath. But once we were free of them, the sea itself became our master. The wind tossed us like leaves. The waves drove us wherever they pleased. All that day and the long, cold night, we drifted between life and death, until, by God's mercy, we were cast upon another shore. The island was fair and full of fruit, and we ate gratefully, giving thanks for our lives. When evening came, we lay down upon the sand to rest, but our sleep was broken by a dreadful hissing. A serpent, long as a palm tree, sliding toward us. Its scales scraped together with a sound like iron. Before we could flee, it struck and caught one of my friends. His cries were terrible, but the monster crushed him, flung him to the ground, and swallowed him whole. My other companion and I ran for our lives. Even as we fled, we heard the serpent behind us, rattling and hissing as it cast up the poor man's bones. At dawn, we saw those bones white upon the sand. I wept aloud, crying, "O Lord, why must our miseries never end?" Yesterday, we escaped the rage of a giant and the fury of the sea. And today we face a horror just as cruel. Wandering in despair, we came upon a tall, ancient tree. There, we planned to climb at night and sleep among its branches, safe from the ground. We gathered wild fruit as before, and when darkness fell, we climbed high. But soon we heard the serpent again, crawling and hissing at the roots. It raised itself up the trunk, and alas, it reached my companion before me, devoured him, and vanished into the night. I clung to the branches until dawn, trembling and alone. The thought that I would soon share my friend's fate filled me with such terror that I nearly cast myself into the sea. Yet some faint hope of life held me back. I gathered small pieces of wood, vines, and thorns, and bound them into bundles. With these, I built a circle about the tree and tied it fast. Then I crept inside, trusting to God and my frail wall of thorns. When night fell, the serpent came again, circling my refuge. It hissed and struck, but the thorns held firm. All night, it prowled. Like a cat around a mouse it could not reach. At last, when morning came, it slipped away. Still, I dared not move until the sun rose high, worn out with labor, and the foul stench the creature had left. I felt that death would be sweeter than such torment. I left the tree and ran toward the sea, meaning to throw myself into the waves. But heaven pitied me. Just as I was about to leap, I saw a ship far off upon the water. I tore off my turban and waved it, shouting with all my strength. The sailors saw me. The captain sent a boat, and I was brought aboard. They gathered round in wonder, asking how I had come to that forsaken place. When I told them my story, the oldest among them nodded solemnly. They had heard tales of the giants who haunted that island, creatures that devoured men both raw and roasted, and of the serpents that slithered there in great number, hiding by day and hunting by night. Rejoicing that I had escaped such horrors, they fed me with the finest food they had. Seeing my clothes torn to rags, the captain kindly gave me a new suit. We sailed on together from island to island, until at last we reached the Isle of Salahat, where sweet-scented sandalwood grows, wood so precious that physicians prize it for its healing power. And there, under God's mercy, my sufferings came to an end. For a time, we entered the harbor and dropped anchor there. The merchants began to unload their goods, each eager to sell or trade what they had brought from distant lands. During this time, the captain called me to his side and said, "My good friend, in my hold there are bales belonging to a merchant who once sailed with me. The poor man has long since passed away, and I have kept his goods safe, hoping that one day I might return the profit to his rightful heirs, if ever I should find them." He showed me the cargo piled upon the deck. "Those are the goods I speak of," he said. "Would you do me the favor of selling them? You shall, of course, receive a fair share of the earnings for your trouble." I thanked him warmly for the offer, glad to have a task instead of idly waiting while others worked. The ship's clerk wrote down the name of every merchant and every crate. Then he turned to the captain and asked whose name should be entered beside the bales entrusted to me. The captain replied, "Write down the name Sinbad the Sailor." At that moment, my heart leapt. To hear my own name spoken so suddenly by a man who once left me behind filled me with wonder and strange joy. I looked closely at him then, and in that weathered face, I recognized the very captain who, on my second voyage, had sailed away while I slept beside a stream on a lonely island. He had thought me lost, and so had left without me. He, on his part, could not know me at once, for time had changed us both. "Captain," I asked gently. Was the merchant's name truly Sinbad? Yes, said he. He was from Baghdad. He boarded my ship at Basra. One day, when we stopped at an island for fresh water, he wandered off. I cannot say how, but through some mistake, we raised anchor and sailed away without him. Only hours later did we notice he was gone. By then, the wind had turned fierce behind us, and no strength of oar or sail could bring us back. Then you believed he perished? I asked. Without doubt, said the captain. Then open your eyes, dear captain, said I, and behold the man you left behind. I am Sinbad the Sailor. That day, I fell asleep by a brook and awoke to find myself forsaken. The captain gazed at me, long and hard. At last he cried, "Praise be to God," and threw his arms around me. I thank heaven that destiny has set right what my sorrow caused. Those are your goods, my friend. I have guarded them well, and in every port have turned them to profit. Now I return them to you, with all the gain they have earned. I received my property with deep gratitude, blessing the captain for his honesty. From the island of Salahat, we sailed onward to another shore, where I bought cloves, cinnamon, and many other precious wares. When we left that island, we saw a turtle, vast as a ship, its shell 20 arms in length, and fish shaped like oxen, giving milk, their hides so tough that men made shields from them. I saw, too, a strange fish, the color and form of a camel. After a long voyage, we reached at last the port of Basra. From there, I returned to Baghdad, laden with riches, so many that I could not even count them. I gave alms to the poor, as was my custom, and bought new lands to add to those I already owned. Thus Sinbad ended the tale of his third voyage. Once more he sent to Hindbad a gift of 100 sequins and invited him to return the next day for dinner, to hear the story of the fourth. Hindbad departed with the other guests. The following day they came again, and when the meal was done, Sinbad began to speak once more of the strange seas he had crossed and the wonders he had seen. The fourth voyage of Sinbad the Sailor. After my third voyage, the pleasures of home no longer held me. The quiet days and cheerful feasts could not quench my longing for distant shores. Once again, the call of the sea stirred in my heart. I arranged my household, gathered goods that might sell well in foreign lands, and set forth on a new adventure. I journeyed through Persia, crossing many provinces until I reached a great harbor. There, I boarded a ship bound for the eastern seas. We sailed with fair winds, stopping at ports and islands bright with strange wonders. But one day, far from land, a furious storm rose. The captain gave his orders: lower the sails, hold fast the ropes. But all was in vain. The wind tore through the rigging, the rudder snapped, and the sails were shredded to ribbons. The ship struck hidden rocks and broke apart. Many merchants and sailors were swallowed by the sea, and all our goods were lost. By fortune alone, I clung to a plank with a few other survivors. The waves carried us to an island where we found sweet water and wild fruit to keep us alive. That night, we lay upon the shore, weary and speechless from our ordeal. When dawn came, we ventured inland and soon came upon houses. Before we could call out, a host of black-skinned men surrounded us. They divided us among themselves, leading each small group away to separate dwellings. I was taken with 5 companions to one such house. There they bade us sit and offered us a strange green herb to eat. My friends, driven by hunger, ate greedily. Yet I felt an unease and refused the food. My caution saved me, for soon my friends began to laugh and babble like children. Their minds lost in madness. Our captors brought bowls of rice cooked in coconut oil. My companions, no longer aware of themselves, ate hungrily. I ate but little and watched. Then I understood the horror. The herb had dulled their minds, and the rice was meant to fatten them. These were cannibals who fed their victims before the feast. Because I kept my senses, fear consumed my appetite. I grew thinner each day, and that weakness became my deliverance. When the savages saw me sickly and lean, they spared me, saying they would wait until another time. Left unguarded, I wandered further each day. One afternoon, seeing an old man watch me suspiciously, I pretended not to hear his calls and fled. By the time he raised alarm, I was gone. I traveled 7 days through wild places, living on coconuts for food and drink. At last, on the 8th day, I came upon the shore and beheld men with skin as fair as mine, gathering pepper from the vines. Hope leapt in my chest. I ran to them and called out. They spoke to me in Arabic, my own tongue. With tears of joy, I told them of the shipwreck, the island, and the man-eaters. They listened in wonder and took me aboard their ship. When their work was done, they brought me to their island and presented me to their king, a good and noble ruler. He heard my tale with astonishment, clothed me in fine garments, and ordered his people to treat me with honor. The island was rich and full of life, its trade prosperous, its people kind. The king's generosity eased my sorrow, and in time I was beloved among his court. Yet I marveled at one custom. No rider, not even the king himself, used saddle or bridle. With his permission, I fashioned the first saddles they had ever seen, carved of wood, padded and covered with embroidered cloth, and forged the bit and stirrups besides. The king tried it, delighted in its comfort, and rewarded me richly. Soon, nobles and courtiers begged for saddles of their own, and I grew wealthy and well known. The king held me dear. One day he said, "Sinbad, I would have you stay in my land forever. Therefore, I will give you a wife of noble birth." I bowed low, for who could refuse a king? He gave me a bride, both beautiful and wise, and for a time we lived in peace. But my heart still turned toward Baghdad, toward the home and fortune I had left behind. While I pondered my fate, a neighbor's wife fell ill and died. I went to comfort him and found him weeping bitterly. I said, "May God preserve your life." He answered, "Alas, my friend, within an hour I, too, shall be no more." "Oh, my good sir," I said softly, "do not speak with such sorrow. I pray that it will not come to pass. You shall live long, and we shall share many days together." He sighed and answered, "May you live long indeed. But for me, the hour has come. I must tell you, before the sun sets, they will bury me beside my wife. It is the ancient law of our island. None may defy it. When the husband dies, the wife is buried alive with him. And when the wife dies first," his voice trembled, "the husband follows her into the earth." As he spoke, my heart grew heavy with horror. Soon after, the family, the neighbors, and all their friends gathered for the funeral. They dressed the dead woman in her richest gown, as if for her wedding day, and adorned her with jewels and gold. Then they laid her in an open coffin, and the long, solemn procession began. Her husband walked behind, leading the mourners up a steep mountain by the sea. At the summit stood a great stone that covered a deep well. The men rolled it aside. The coffin was lowered down into the darkness, with all her ornaments beside her. Then the husband embraced his kin one last time. They placed him, too, in another open coffin, with a jug of water and 7 small loaves of bread. Down he went, into the same pit. When both had vanished, they rolled the heavy stone back across the mouth of the well. My heart ached as I watched. The others looked on without pity, as though such things were as common as sunrise. Later, I spoke to the king and said, "Your Majesty, I cannot understand this dreadful custom, burying the living with the dead. I have traveled through many lands and met all kinds of people, yet never have I heard of such a cruel law." The king answered calmly, "So it is Sinbad. It is the law of this island, and even I must obey it. Should the queen die before me, I too shall be buried alive beside her. But, sire, I pleaded, must foreigners also submit to this law? The king smiled sadly. If they wed an island wife, they are bound as we are. I left the palace in despair. From that day on, I lived in dread that my own wife might fall ill. And alas, before long, she did. Her sickness grew heavy, and within days, she died. Imagine, if you can, my grief and terror. To be buried alive is no less dreadful than to be devoured by wild beasts. Yet I could not escape my fate. The king himself and all his nobles came to honor the funeral. They placed my poor wife in her coffin, dressed in finery, and I walked behind her, the second actor in this cruel play, my eyes full of tears. Before we reached the mountain, I threw myself before the king and the people. I bowed to the ground, kissing the hem of their garments, and begged them with all my heart, "Have mercy on me. I am a stranger. I should not be judged by your ancient law. My homeland awaits me. My children live there still." But they turned away, unmoved. The funeral went on. They lowered her body into the well. And then it was my turn. I was placed in an open coffin with a jar of water and 7 small loaves. The stone closed above me, shutting out the light of the world. As they lowered me down, a faint gleam from above showed me the horror below. The pit opened into a vast cavern, reeking of decay. I saw the dim shapes of corpses, countless and terrible. Some, perhaps newly buried, still breathed their last. When I reached the bottom, I leapt from my coffin, covering my face from the stench, and lay weeping upon the cold ground. At last, I spoke to myself in despair. Truly, God's will rules all things. But oh, poor Sinbad, what folly brought you to such an end? Would it not have been better to die at sea rather than perish slowly in this dreadful tomb? Your greed has led you here, your restless heart that would not rest in peace. Foolish man, you could have stayed at home, living quietly on the fruits of your labor. But now, your reward is death in darkness. Those were the cries of despair that filled the hollow of the cave, echoing back at me like ghosts mocking my sorrow. I struck my head and chest in rage and hopelessness, overcome by grief and terror. And yet, shall I confess it to you? Even in the depths of misery, the stubborn spark of life still burned within me. It whispered that to breathe, even one more hour, was better than to surrender to death. So, With one hand pressed over my nose against the stench, I groped my way through the dark, seeking the loaf of bread and the flask of water left inside my coffin. Those alone would keep me alive a little longer, though the cavern was black as pitch, and I could no longer tell day from night. I found my way back to my resting place. The hollow seemed larger now, and filled with more bodies than I had thought. For several days, I lived on my meager bread and water, until they were gone, and all that was left to do was wait for death. Then, one day, I heard it, the heavy sound of stone being moved above. A new coffin was being lowered, one dead, one alive. The dead was a man, and in that desperate moment, I did what desperate men may do. When the woman beside him was let down and the mouth of the pit was sealed, I crept toward her coffin. Lifting a great bone from the ground, I struck her head 3 times, hard and fast. She fell silent forever. It was a cruel deed, but it gave me her bread and water. Thus I lived again for a few days more. When another pair was lowered, a dead woman and a living man, I did the same. Grim fortune favored me, for in those days many died in the city, and by their deaths I survived. Then came a day unlike the others. After I had slain a woman newly brought down, I heard breathing, slow and heavy, and the sound of footsteps. I followed it through the dark. The more I listened, the closer I drew, until I thought I saw something moving ahead, a shape that fled each time I neared. Long I pursued it, stumbling through the blackness, until at last I saw a glimmer, a light like a distant star. I went toward it, again and again losing it behind stone, then finding it once more until I reached the place where it shone. It was an opening in the rock, wide enough for a man to crawl through. I stood there, trembling, until my heart grew steady. Then I crept through and found myself upon the seashore. Oh, the joy that burst within me. I could scarcely believe it was real. Only when the air filled my lungs and the light stung my eyes did I know that life, not dream, surrounded me. Then I understood the sound I had followed. It was a sea creature that came into the cave to feed on the dead. I gazed back at the mountain and saw how it stood between the city and the sea, steep and unbroken, a wall no man could cross. Falling to my knees, I thanked the Almighty for my deliverance. Afterward, I returned into the cave, took out what bread remained, and ate it there on the shore, the sweetest meal of my life. Once more, I entered the cavern and gathered from the coffins all I could carry: diamonds, pearls, gold bracelets, silks, and fine cloths. I bound them into bundles with the ropes that had once lowered the dead. There were plenty of those, and laid them by the sea, safe from the rain, for it was not the season of storms. 2 or 3 days passed. Then I saw a ship leaving the harbor, sailing close to the coast. I tore off my headscarf and waved it high, crying out with all my strength. The sailors saw me and sent a boat ashore. They asked how I had come to such a place, and I told them I had been wrecked in a storm 2 days before, along with the goods they could see beside me. They believed me and brought me aboard with my bundles. The captain rejoiced to have saved a soul from the sea, and though I offered him jewels in thanks, he would not take them. We sailed past many islands, among them the Isle of Bells, 10 days' voyage from the Isle of Serendib, and as far again from the Isle of Kayla, where lead, sugarcane, and camphor are found in plenty. The ruler of Kayla was a rich and mighty king, whose power reached even to the Isle of Bells. Yet his people were fierce and still fed on human flesh. After we had traded many goods, we sailed on to other islands, and at last I came safely home to Baghdad, bearing riches beyond count. To thank the Most High for his mercy, I built temples, gave alms to the poor, and lived thereafter in peace among my friends and kin, feasting, rejoicing, and praising the giver of all good things. At this point, Sinbad concluded the story of his 4th voyage. Those who listened found it even more fascinating than the first 3. Once again, he presented Hindbad with 100 sequins and invited him, along with all the guests, to return the next day at the same hour to dine at his house and hear the tale of his 5th voyage in full detail. Hindbad and the other guests took their leave. The next day, when everyone had gathered again, they sat down to the meal, which was no less splendid than the previous ones. At the end of it, Sinbad began to recount the adventures of his 5th voyage as follows. The 5th voyage of Sinbad the Sailor. The pleasures of life were sweet enough to make me forget the toils and dangers I had endured. Yet none of them could still my longing for new journeys. So I bought fine goods, packed them with care, and brought them to the nearest harbor. There I resolved no longer to depend on another captain's whim. With my own gold, I built a ship and fitted her myself, that I might sail where my heart desired. When at last the sails were raised and a gentle wind blew from the shore, we set forth upon the sea. After many days, we came to a lonely island, fair but desolate. There, upon the sand, we found the egg of a giant bird, an eagle so vast it could shadow a mountain. Within the egg, a young chick stirred, its beak already breaking through the shell. The merchants who traveled with me, reckless and curious, brought axes and split the egg apart. They tore the poor creature into pieces and roasted it over the fire. Though I warned them sternly to leave the egg untouched, they paid no heed. Scarcely had they finished their feast when, far above us, two great clouds appeared. Our captain, a man seasoned by the sea, cried out that they were no clouds at all, but the parents of the slain chick. "To the ship," he shouted. "Hurry, or doom will fall upon us." We ran for our lives and loosed the sails. The wind filled them, and we fled. But the monstrous birds came swiftly after us, crying with dreadful voices. When they saw the broken shell, they turned away in grief, only to return moments later, each bearing a stone as large as a house. One stone missed its mark and plunged into the sea, raising waves like mountains. The other struck true, crashing through the heart of our ship and shattering her into 1,000 splinters. All were lost, sailors and merchants alike. I too was thrown into the sea, but by fortune I seized a floating plank and clung fast. The tide was kind and carried me, half dead, to the jagged coast of another island. I crawled ashore, rested on the soft grass, and thanked heaven for my life. When I had gathered strength, I wandered inland. The island was wondrously fair, trees heavy with fruit, flowers in bloom, and silver streams winding through meadows. I drank from the clear waters, ate the fruit, and found their sweetness eased my weariness. That night I lay upon the grass, but sleep would not stay with me. Loneliness and fear pressed upon my heart, and I lamented my folly in leaving home for yet another perilous voyage. In despair, I even wished for death. But dawn came at last, and with it, the courage to go on. As I walked beside a stream, I saw an old man seated by the water. He was frail and bent, his skin the color of withered bark. Thinking he too had been cast ashore, I greeted him kindly. He made no answer, only motioned for me to carry him across the stream to gather fruit from the trees beyond. I took pity on him and lifted him upon my back. But when we reached the other side, and I stooped to let him down, he twined his legs about my neck and clung fast, his skin rough and leathery, like that of an ox. No matter how I struggled, he would not let go. He pressed his feet hard against my chest until I could scarcely breathe. And from that moment, I was his captive. Day after day, he forced me to bear him through the forest. When he saw fruit, he tugged my hair to stop, plucked the fruit, and ate it. At night, he slept upon my shoulders, his legs locked tight around my throat. At dawn, he would kick me awake and make me walk again. You can imagine my torment, to be the beast of burden for that wicked old man, unable to rest or escape. One day, I found a gourd lying dry upon the ground. I cleaned it and filled it with the juice of ripe grapes that grew plentifully on the island. After some days, the juice turned to wine. When the old man drove me past the spot, I drank from the gourd and felt my heart grow light. I sang and even danced beneath his weight. Seeing this, he snatched the gourd and drank deeply. The wine pleased him so much that he drained it to the dregs. Soon he was reeling and mumbling songs of his own. His legs slackened, his grip loosened. In that moment, I hurled him to the ground and crushed his skull with a stone. Freed at last, I rejoiced and made my way toward the sea. There I found sailors drawing water for their ship. They stared in wonder as I told my tale. "You have escaped the old man of the sea," they said. "None before you has lived to tell of him. For all others, he has strangled." They took me aboard, and the captain, moved by my story, gave me passage. After some days, we reached a great city of stone houses shining in the sun. A kind merchant befriended me and led me to a house for foreign traders. He gave me a sack and bade me follow men who gathered coconuts. "Do as they do," he warned, "and never stray, for the forest holds its own perils." We journeyed to a grove of tall, straight trees, their trunks smooth as glass, their crowns heavy with fruit no man could climb to reach. They were palm trees, and high among their leaves leapt countless apes, great and small, and thus began another strange chapter in my wanderings. They fled at the sight of us, darting up into the treetops with astonishing speed and nimbleness. The merchants who had come with me began gathering stones and hurling them at the monkeys perched above. I did the same, following their example. The monkeys, fooled by our trick, grew furious. In their rage, they plucked coconuts from the trees and threw them down at us, chattering and shrieking with anger. We collected every coconut that fell and filled our sacks, while from time to time tossing more stones to keep the creatures enraged. By that clever ruse, we gathered a great heap of fruit, for there was no other way to harvest them. When our sacks were full, we returned to the city. The merchant who had first brought me into the forest paid me for all the coconuts I had gathered. "Do this every day," he said kindly, "and soon you will earn enough to return home." I thanked him for his wise advice and set to work. Before long, I had amassed a great pile of coconuts, and with it, a fair amount of gold. The ship that had brought me there soon departed, loaded with the merchants' goods and their coconuts. I waited for another vessel to arrive, one bound for a distant island. When it came to port, I loaded all my coconuts aboard. As the sails were raised, I went to bid farewell to the merchant to whom I owed so much. He could not accompany me, for his affairs were not yet settled. We set sail and journeyed toward an island famed for its pepper trees. From there, we sailed on to the island of Komari, where the finest aloes wood in all the world could be found. The people of that land lived by strict laws. No wine was permitted, nor any place of indulgence or vice. I traded my coconuts for pepper and aloes wood, and then, with other merchants, traveled to the pearl fisheries. There I hired divers, who brought up for me a great number of large, flawless pearls. Joyful and grateful, I set out once more upon the sea, carried by a favorable wind to the port of Basra. From there, I returned to Baghdad, where I sold my pepper, aloes wood, and pearls for a handsome fortune. I gave 1/10 of all my earnings to the poor, and, as after each of my voyages, I spent the rest in pleasure and rest, to forget the hardships I had endured. When Sinbad finished his tale, he ordered that 100 sequins be given to Hindbad. The porter and the guests took their leave. The next day, the same guests returned once more to the house of the wealthy Sinbad. After being received and feasted as before, they waited as he began the tale of his 6th voyage, the story that I shall now relate to you. The 6th voyage of Sinbad the Sailor. My friends, you may well wonder why, after 5 shipwrecks and countless perils, I did not rest, but once again cast myself upon the sea of hardship, chasing after new misfortunes. Truly, I often ask myself the same question. Perhaps it is the star that governs my fate, forever drawing me toward danger. Yet, after a year of peace at home, I found myself restless once more. Against the tears and pleading of family and friends who sought to keep me safe, I prepared for my 6th voyage. This time, I did not sail through the Persian Gulf. Instead, I journeyed by land across many provinces of that country and of India until I reached a port where I found a sturdy ship. Its captain planned a long voyage, and indeed, it proved both long and most unfortunate. Before long, the captain and helmsman lost their bearings. When at last they discovered where we were, their faces turned pale, for it brought us no comfort at all. One day, the captain suddenly let out a terrible cry and fled his post. He tore the turban from his head, rent his beard, and struck his brow like one gone mad with despair. We asked what troubled him so deeply, And he answered, "My friends, we have fallen into the most perilous place in all the seas. A fierce current is drawing us toward destruction, and within moments we shall perish. Pray to the Almighty for mercy, for only His hand can save us now." Even as he spoke, he gave the order to furl the sails, but the ropes snapped. The ship, helpless, was caught in the rushing water and driven toward the base of a mountain whose cliffs rose sheer from the sea. We struck the rocks, and the vessel broke apart. By grace alone, we escaped with our lives, carrying what little food and treasure we could to shore. When all was done, the captain said with sorrow, "The will of God has been fulfilled. Here shall each of us dig his own grave. Let us bid one another farewell, for none who have landed upon this accursed shore have ever returned home." His words froze our hearts. We embraced one another in tears, lamenting our fate. The mountain that towered above us formed the edge of a vast island. The shore was strewn with the shattered remains of ships and the bleached bones of those who had come before us, a sight dreadful to behold. Riches lay scattered everywhere, jewels, silks, and gold, yet their abundance only deepened the desolation. Here, unlike anywhere else on earth, a mighty river of sweet water flowed from the sea into the land, vanishing through a cavern vast and dark. The mountain itself gleamed with quartz, rubies, and precious stones, and from its flank poured a spring of resin or oil that, when eaten by fish, became amber. The waves cast up that amber in heaps along the shore, and the trees that grew there were mostly aloes of the finest kind. But there was no escape. Whatever entered that abyss never returned. Any ship driven there was caught between wind and current, dashed against the rocks, and destroyed. Even when a favorable wind might have carried a vessel away, the tall mountain blocked it, leaving only dead calm, until the current seized it once more and hurled it to ruin, as it had done with ours. So we remained upon that lonely shore, waiting each day for death. We divided our food evenly, though each man's life depended on how sparingly he ate. One by one, my companions died, and I buried them, all with my own hands. Do not think it strange that I alone survived, for I ate less than the others, and had hidden a small store of food unknown to them. Yet when I laid my last companion in the earth, I saw that my own end was near. I dug my grave beside theirs, ready to lie down in it, for there was none left to bury me. In my despair, I cursed my folly, bit my hands until they bled, and almost took my own life to hasten the inevitable. But the mercy of heaven was not yet finished with me. wandering to the edge of the river where it disappeared into the mountain's mouth, I thought, this river must emerge somewhere. If I build a raft and trust myself to its current, I may reach the world of men again, or die in the attempt. Either way, I shall change the manner of my death. So I set to work. From the strong timbers and ropes that lay scattered along the beach, I built a raft and bound it fast. Upon it, I placed some jewels, amber, and fine cloth for ballast, took 2 small oars, and commended my soul to God. Once the current drew me into the cavern, all light vanished. I drifted in utter darkness for days, sometimes striking my head on the low vault above. My food dwindled to crumbs. At last, weak and starving, sleep overtook me. A sleep so deep I knew not how long it lasted. When I awoke, I found myself upon a wide plain beside a shining river. Around me stood a group of dark-skinned men. My raft was tied to the bank. When I rose to greet them, they answered kindly, though I did not understand their tongue. Joy flooded me, such joy that I doubted if I were still alive. Yet when I felt the earth beneath me, I whispered a prayer and recited an old verse, "Call upon the Most High, and He will deliver thee. Close thine eyes in trust, for even in thy sleep, God shall turn thy sorrow into joy." One among them who knew the Arabic tongue stepped forward and said, "Brother, do not be astonished. We live upon this plain, and today we came to draw water from the river that flows down from yonder mountain. Seeing something borne along the stream, we hastened to the bank and found thy raft. One of us swam out to bring it to shore, and we waited for thee to awaken. Tell us, stranger, what fate has cast thee upon this river?" I asked first for food, and when they had fed me, I told them all that had befallen me. They listened in wonder and said through the interpreter, "Truly, this is a tale most marvelous. You must come before our king and tell it to him yourself, for such a story should be heard from the very lips of the man who lived it." I agreed readily. They brought a horse, helped me mount, and led the way, some before, others following behind, carrying my raft and treasures. Thus we came, at last, to the city of Serendib, upon the island of the same name. They presented me before their sovereign, and I bowed low, touching my forehead to the earth in the manner of greeting used before the kings of India. The king helped me rise and welcomed me with great courtesy, bidding me sit beside him. First, he asked my name. I answered, "I am Sinbad, Sinbad the Sailor, so they call me, for I have crossed many seas and wandered through countless lands. I am a citizen of Baghdad." The king nodded thoughtfully, then said, "Tell me, Sinbad, how came you to this kingdom? By what path did the waves bring you here?" I hid nothing from him. I told the whole tale just as you have heard it now. The king listened with wonder and delight, and when I had finished, he ordered that my story be written in letters of gold and kept among the treasures of his royal archives. Then they brought before him the raft and the bundles of goods I had saved. The king gazed with admiration upon the aloes, amber, and fragrant woods, and above all, upon the rubies and emeralds. For even in his vast treasury, no jewel shone so purely. Seeing his delight, I bowed low and said, "Your Majesty, not only I myself, but all that lies upon this raft belongs to you. I beg you to accept what is already yours." The king smiled gently. "Sinbad," said he, "I have no wish to take what the Almighty has granted you. Rather, I would give you gifts of my own. I would not have you leave my land without bearing signs of its friendship and generosity." I could only answer his noble words with blessings and praise, calling down prosperity upon his reign. The king then entrusted a high officer to care for me, to provide me with servants and all that I required, at the royal expense. This man carried out his duty faithfully, bringing me to a fine house and transferring there every bundle from my raft. Each day, at a certain hour, I went to pay my respects to the king. The rest of my time I spent exploring the city and its wonders. The Isle of Serendib, as they call it, lies beneath the very path of the sun. Thus, its days and nights are equal, each 12 hours long. It stretches 80 parasangs in length and as many in breadth. Its capital lies at the foot of a magnificent mountain that rises at the island's heart. A mountain so high that sailors can see it from the sea 3 days before they reach its shores. The slopes are rich with rubies and other precious stones, and the rocks are full of rare metals. Great cedars and tall palms shade the valleys, and along the coast, the people dive for pearls. In some ravines, diamonds glimmer among the stones. Being devout, I journeyed one day to the mountain said to be the place where Adam, our first father, set foot when he was cast out from paradise. My heart trembled as I climbed to its summit, where clouds and silence met. When I returned to the city, I asked the king's leave to go home. He granted it graciously and with honor, and he commanded that I should not depart empty-handed. From his treasury, he brought forth costly gifts, and in addition, gave me a letter for our own sovereign, the commander of the faithful, Caliph Harun al-Rashid. "Carry this to your emperor," said he, "and tell him that I send it with friendship and goodwill." The king's letter was written upon the skin of a rare beast, golden-hued and soft as silk, in letters of blue. It read thus: "From the King of India, whose elephants march before him, who dwells in a palace roofed with 100,000 rubies, and whose treasury holds 20,000 diamond garlands. To the mighty Caliph Harun al-Rashid, Lord of the Faithful. Though the gifts we send are small, may your Majesty receive them in the spirit of brotherhood and friendship from which they come. I ask only that I may be counted among your friends, for in rank and station I am your equal. May peace and honor be upon you." The gifts were these. First, a goblet carved from a single ruby, half a cubit high and thick as a man's finger, filled with pearls of perfect roundness. Second, the skin of a serpent whose scales shone like gold coins. Whoever slept upon it was safe from all sickness. Third, 50,000 drams of the finest aloes wood, and 30 lumps of camphor as large as walnuts. And lastly, a slave maiden of surpassing beauty, clad in robes embroidered with jewels. Our ship set sail, and after many fair weather days, we reached Basra. From there, I went up to Baghdad. My first act upon arriving was to fulfill my duty. I presented myself before the Caliph with the letter and the gifts, and behind me came the slave girl and my servants bearing the treasures entrusted to me. When the Caliph had read the letter, he asked if the king of Serendib was truly so great and wealthy as described. I bowed low and said, "O Commander of the Faithful, I have seen it with my own eyes." The king spoke no exaggeration. His palace is a wonder to behold. When he rides forth, he sits upon a throne set on the back of an elephant, surrounded by his viziers, his courtiers, and 1,000 guards in garments of gold and silk. Before him rides a soldier bearing a golden lance. Behind him, another holds a staff of gold topped with a great emerald. And when the king passes, a herald cries aloud, "Behold the mighty sovereign of India, who lives in a palace roofed with rubies and adorned with diamonds beyond number." Then another calls out, "This mighty king, so great and powerful, too shall die, as all men must die." And the first replies, "Praise be to him who alone lives forever." The Caliph smiled and said, "Wisdom speaks in the words of that king, and his people must indeed be worthy of such a ruler." Then he dismissed me with many rewards and honors, and so Sinbad ended his tale. The guests rose and took their leave, but before they went, he gave poor Hindbad 100 sequins, saying, "Come again tomorrow, my friend, and you shall hear the tale of my 7th and final voyage." The 7th and last voyage of Sinbad the Sailor. After my 6th voyage, I resolved never again to set sail upon the sea. I had reached an age that longed for rest, and moreover, I had sworn to myself that I would never again risk the perils which had so often nearly cost me my life. Thus, I thought only of spending my remaining days in peace and comfort. One day, as I was entertaining some friends at a feast, a servant came hastily to announce that a royal officer sought an audience. I rose at once to receive him, and he said, "The Caliph commands me to tell you that His Majesty wishes to speak with you." I followed the officer to the palace, bowed before the Caliph, and kissed the ground at his feet. He said, "Sinbad, I have need of you. You must carry my letter and gifts to the King of Serendib, for I wish to return his courtesies with my own." The command struck me like thunder. I answered, "O Commander of the Faithful, I am ever ready to obey your Majesty. Yet I beg you to consider, I have endured many hardships and have vowed never again to leave Baghdad." Then I told him, with full detail, all my past adventures. The Caliph listened patiently to the end. When I had finished, he said, "Indeed, what you recount is wondrous beyond belief. But these marvels must not prevent you from serving me. You need only deliver my message and gifts to the King of Serendib. After that, you may return as you please. Surely you see, Sinbad, that until I return the king's courtesy, my own honor remains incomplete." Seeing that the Caliph's will was firm, I bowed in submission. He rejoiced at my obedience and commanded that 1,000 sequins be given me for my journey. I prepared without delay. Having received the royal presents and the Caliph's own handwritten letter, I set out for Basra, where I embarked upon a ship. The voyage was smooth and blessed with fair winds. At last, we reached the island of Serendib. There I presented myself to the royal ministers, explained my mission, and was at once conducted in great ceremony to the palace. I bowed low before the king, according to the custom of the land. He recognized me at once and greeted me with joy. "Ah, Sinbad, welcome, my friend. Since the day you departed, I have often thought of you. Praise be to this day, when fortune allows us to meet again." After thanking him for his gracious words, I delivered the Caliph's letter and the splendid gifts. The king received them with visible delight. The Caliph's offerings were magnificent. A golden embroidered bed worth 1,000 sequins, 50 robes woven of the finest fabrics, 100 more of soft white linen from Cairo, Suez, Kufa, and Alexandria, a purple couch, and another of rare design, a wide-mouthed agate vase carved with the figure of a man kneeling on one knee, drawing his bow against a lion. and lastly, a wondrous table said to have belonged to the great King Solomon himself. The letter read, "In the name of the Most High and the guide of all paths, Harun al-Rashid, whom God has set upon the throne of his glorious ancestors, sends greetings to the mighty and happy monarch of Serendib. We received your noble letter with joy. May this message from our garden of wisdom reach you in peace, and may you perceive therein the sincerity of our friendship." The king of Serendib rejoiced greatly at this reply. Sometime after the audience, I sought permission to return home, but the king, unwilling to part so soon, delayed me again and again. At last he consented, and before I left, he bestowed upon me rich presents. I embarked once more, intending to sail straight for Baghdad. But destiny had another plan. 3 or 4 days after our departure, our ship was attacked by pirates. We had no means of defense. Those who resisted were slain. The rest of us were taken captive. The robbers stripped us of all we owned, dressed us in rough garments, and carried us to a distant island, where we were sold as slaves. I was purchased by a wealthy merchant. He took me to his house, clothed me as a servant, and after some days asked what trade I knew. I told him I was no craftsman, but a merchant by profession, ruined by pirates. He then asked, "Can you shoot with a bow?" I answered that it was one of the arts I had practiced in my youth. He handed me a bow and arrows, seated me behind him on an elephant, and we rode for hours into a vast forest. At length, we halted. Pointing to a tall tree, he said, "Climb to the top and watch. When you see elephants pass, shoot one. If you bring one down, return and tell me." He left me food and departed. That night, I saw none. But at sunrise, a great herd appeared. I loosed many arrows until one mighty beast fell. The rest fled, and I hurried to my master with the news. He praised me warmly and treated me to a fine meal. Together, we went to the forest to bury the elephant, intending to return later for its ivory. For 2 months, I continued the hunt, felling one beast each day. But one morning, as I waited, the herd did not pass as usual. Instead, they came thundering straight toward me, shaking the earth. I trembled so that my bow slipped from my hands. The largest elephant seized the tree with its trunk, tore it from the ground, and laid it down gently, placing me unhurt upon its back. Then it led the herd away through the forest. After some time, it stopped upon a broad hill strewn with elephant bones and ivory, set me down, and left. Amazed, I realized what this place was: the elephant's graveyard, where the old and dying came to rest. They had brought me there, as if to say, take what you desire of our tusks, but shed no more of our blood." When I recovered from my wonder, I returned on foot to the city. After a day and a night's travel, I reached my master's house. Seeing me, he cried, "Oh, poor Sinbad, I thought you dead. I found the tree uprooted, your bow on the ground, and no sign of you." I told him all that had happened. The next day, we went together to the hill, and he was astonished to see it exactly as I described, heaped with ivory. We loaded our elephants with as many tusks as they could carry. On the way home, he said, "My brother, for so I shall now call you, since I will treat you no longer as a slave. May God bless you. Through you, I am delivered from ruin." Every year, we lose countless men gathering ivory, for the elephants destroy them. But heaven has shown you mercy, and through you will enrich the whole city. I return your freedom in the name of God, and will see you sent home with wealth and honor." I thanked him deeply. "Master," said I, "your kindness and my liberty are reward enough. Only grant me leave to return to my own land." He answered, "So be it. When the monsoon brings the ivory ships, I shall send you home with many gifts." And thus ended the beginning of my 7th and strangest voyage. And once again, I thanked my master for granting me freedom and for all his generous intentions toward me. I remained in his house until the monsoon winds were ready. During that time, we continued to journey to the hill where the ivory lay, so many times indeed, that his warehouses grew full to bursting. Every merchant of ivory soon learned of my discovery, for such a secret could not be hidden long. At last, the trading ships arrived. My master himself chose the vessel that would carry me home, and he ordered that half its cargo be filled with ivory for my sake. Nor did he forget to send aboard abundant stores of food and water for the voyage. More than that, he made me attend grand feasts and accept the rare gifts of the land. I thanked him with all my heart and went aboard the ship. We set sail. Yet my thoughts remained troubled and astonished by the strange fate that had restored my liberty. We stopped at several islands to gather fresh provisions, and at last reached a harbor on the coast of India, the very port from which our voyage had first begun. There, to avoid the perils of the sea on the way to Basra, I decided to unload all my ivory and continue by land. I sold the tusks for a great sum, purchased many precious things to offer as gifts, and when all was ready, I joined a caravan of merchants. The journey was long and filled with hardship, yet I bore it patiently, knowing that I need no longer fear the storms of the ocean, nor pirates, nor serpents, nor any of the terrors that once haunted me upon the waves. At last, all trials came to an end. I returned to Baghdad in peace. First, I went before the caliph and gave an account of my embassy. The king said that my absence had caused him much anxiety, though he had always trusted that God would protect me. When I told him of the elephants and the wonders I had seen, he marveled greatly, and would scarce have believed the tale had he not known my honesty. Finding my story worthy of remembrance, he ordered it to be written in letters of gold and placed within his royal archives. I left his court, honored and content, bearing gifts and the caliph's blessing. From that day on, I gave myself wholly to the quiet joys of family, kin, and friends. Thus, Sinbad the Sailor ended the tale of his 7th and final voyage. Then, turning to Hindbad, he said, "Well, my friend, have you ever heard of a man who has endured such trials as I, or lived through such strange perils? After all these labors, is it not just that I now enjoy a life of rest and peace?" Hindbad stepped forward, kissed Sinbad's hand, and replied, "My lord, truly you have suffered beyond all measure. My own toil cannot be compared with yours. If ever I grew weary at my humble work, I was comforted by the little profit that followed. You, noble master, deserve not only ease, but all the riches you possess, for you use them with a generous heart. May you live in gladness all your days." Sinbad smiled, and once more gave Hindbad 100 sequins. He welcomed him among his friends, bade him abandon his burdensome trade, and come daily to dine at his table, that he might ever remember Sinbad the Sailor, whose tales began upon the sea and ended in peace. The story of the 3 apples. Scheherazade went on to say, "Your Majesty, I have already told you once of a night when I accompanied the Caliph Harun al-Rashid on his wanderings. Tonight, I beg leave to tell of another such roaming of that same noble emperor. One evening, the Caliph told his vizier Ja'far that he wished to be at the palace the following night. "Ja'far," the king said, "I mean to slip out and take a turn through the city to see for myself the things my subjects bring to my ears, and especially to learn whether the people are satisfied with the work of my judges. If any man's complaint is true, I will dismiss him and set another in his place who can do better. If, on the other hand, the people praise him, I shall see that he is rightly rewarded." At the appointed hour, the vizier stood in the palace. The Caliph, Ja'far, and Marua, the commander of the palace eunuchs, disguised themselves so that no one would know them, and they left the forbidden quarter together. They passed many squares and marketplaces, and finally went down a narrow street. Beneath the moonlight, they saw an old man, tall and bent, his hair and beard white as frost, wearing a tangled fishing net upon his head. One hand carried a basket woven of palm leaves, the other a staff. "That old fellow looks no merchant of wealth," whispered the vizier. "Let us go near and see what his possessions may be." "Old man," asked the vizier, "who are you?" "My lord," the old man answered, "I am a fisherman, and the poorest and most wretched among my trade. I went out at noon to cast my nets, and all day long I have not caught a single thing. Yet I have a wife and a brood of children. What shall I give them to eat?" Touched, the caliph said to him, "Would you dare to throw your net once more? Whatever you catch, I will pay you 100 coins for it." At these words, the fisherman forgot the weight of his toil and gladly agreed. With the caliph, the vizier, and Marua at his side, he went back down to the bank of the Tigris, thinking to himself, "These great men have kindly faces. Perhaps they will remunerate me for my labor. Even if they give but 1/10 of what they promised, I should be satisfied." They came to the river. The fisherman cast his net and presently drew up a chest, closed and heavy. The caliph bade Jafar at once pay the man his 100 coins. By the king's command, Marua shouldered the chest, and the four hastened back to the palace. The caliph burned to know what lay within. At the palace, they prized open the lid. Inside the chest lay a great basket of palm-woven cane, its cover bound with a scarlet thread. Impatient to relieve the king's curiosity, they cut the cord with a knife rather than untying it, and drew forth something wrapped in a coarse carpet and bound with hempen rope. When they cut the rope and unfolded the hideous bundle, all who stood by recoiled in horror. There lay the body of a woman, white as snow, hacked into many pieces. The caliph stared, thunderstruck. Surprise burned into rage. He fixed the vizier with a glare. "Wretch!" he cried. "Is this how you tend my people? How is it that under your rule a man dares to murder one of my subjects, to cast her into the Tigris, to be forgotten until the day of reckoning, when her ghost shall demand retribution from me? If you do not quickly find the murderer and bring him forth to die for his crimes, by God, I swear, I will hang you and 40 of your kin." "O Commander of the Faithful," Jafar answered, distressed, "I beg leave to entreat your Majesty. Grant me time to make inquiries. 3 days I give you to do it. Do as you will," the caliph replied. The vizier returned home with his heart in knots. "Alas," he said within himself, "in so great and populous a city as Baghdad, how shall I drag from the earth a murderer who struck his blow unseen and has doubtless fled the city? Another might fetch a guilty wretch from the prison and execute him to please the sovereign. But I will not have my conscience gnaw at me for such a wrong. I would sooner die than escape by such a deed." he set his officers to hunt the culprit. They too were troubled and sent soldiers to scour the quarters. All their efforts were in vain. It was like trying to find a needle in the bottom of the sea. Where should one look now for a murderer? Jafar knew that without heaven's aid, his life would end. On the third day, as the vizier feared, a royal clerk came by the king's order to fetch him. Jafar obeyed, and when the caliph asked, "Where is the murderer?" the vizier could only answer, with tears streaming down his face, "O commander of the faithful, I have not found so much as a trace." The caliph flew into a terrible rage, berated him, and ordered that Jafar be hanged with 40 of his kin at the palace gate. While the posts were being erected and soldiers were sent to seize 40 members of the vizier's family in their houses. A crier ran through the streets at the king's command, proclaiming, "Whoever wishes to see the execution of Vizier Jafar and 40 of his kin, gather at the palace gate." When everything was prepared, a host of guards led Jafar and the 40 prisoners to the foot of the scaffold. Nooses were placed about their necks. The populace filled the square. None who looked upon that sight could hold back tears. For Jafar and his kin had long been loved and honored, known for their justice, their liberality, and their integrity. Not only in Baghdad, but throughout the land they were revered. Yet the king's command must be carried out. None dared disobey so stern a sovereign, as the lives of these loyal folk were about to be ended. Suddenly, a young man, handsome and well-dressed, forced his way through the guards, fell at the vizier's feet, kissed his hand, and cried, "O noble vizier, chief of the council, defender of the poor, you do not deserve this doom. I beg you to withdraw, and let me die in your stead. I am the murderer. Put me to death for that woman's blood. I alone am guilty." Though the young man's words brought some relief to Jafar, the vizier pitied him. The youth did not look like a murderer. There was something winning about his face. As Jafar opened his lips to speak, an old man, tall and bent with years, thrust through the guards and cried, "My lord, do not heed the words of this young fellow. I am the murderer of the woman found in the chest. Only I deserve to die. By God, I beg you, punish me rather than an innocent man." "But, sir," the young man persisted to the vizier, "I swear I alone committed that hideous deed. No one was my accomplice." "My son," the old man interrupted, "despair drove you to this. You sought to end your life. But I have lived too long. I should leave this world before you. Let me die for you. I repeat, it was I who committed the murder. Execute me. Hesitate no longer." Their contest of blame forced the vizier to ask the official in charge of the execution to bring both men before the caliph. The officer willingly consented. Before the king, Jafar prostrated himself and kissed the ground 7 times, then said, "O Commander of the Faithful, I bring before your Majesty this old man and this young youth. Each stoutly declares he alone is the murderer who hacked the woman into pieces and cast her into the Tigris. The young man avers it is he. The old man says the opposite." The caliph commanded, "Then hang them both, so." "But, your Majesty," the vizier pleaded, "to execute both when only one slew her would be unjust." At this, the young man cried, "I swear by God Most High that I alone killed the woman, cut her into pieces, and cast her into the Tigris 4 days ago. I will not be found lying on the day of judgment. Therefore, let me be punished." Surprised by such an oath, and seeing that the old man offered no reply, the caliph believed the youth. Turning to him, he asked, "Wretch, why did you commit that dreadful crime? And why do you seek to die for it?" "O Commander of the Faithful," the youth answered, "if I tell the story between me and that woman, it will be a lesson to the world." "Then tell it," the caliph commanded. At the king's bidding, the young man began his tale as follows. The story of the murdered woman and her husband. "O leader of the faithful, your servant begs leave to tell you that the murdered woman was my wife. She was the daughter of that old man who has come here today, a distant relative of mine. She was but 12 when her father gave her to me in marriage. 11 years have passed since. She has borne me 3 children, all of them living still. I must speak honestly. She never gave me cause for complaint. My wife was gentle, virtuous, and most careful to please her husband. As for me, I loved her dearly. I strove to meet her every wish, and never once did I act against her will. About 2 months ago, my wife fell ill. I tended her with all my heart and spared no trouble to see her well again. After a month, she began to feel a little better and begged to take a bath. Before she left the house, she said to me, "My dear, I long to taste an apple. If you could bring me one, I should be most pleased. I have craved one for so long. I tell you plainly that if I do not get it, I may suffer some misfortune." "Very well," I answered. "I will do whatever pleases you." I scoured the markets and stalls for apples. If I found one, I would pay a gold coin without regret. Yet, despite my efforts, I could not find a single apple. I returned home, heavy-hearted. My wife, coming out of her bath and finding no apple, was so saddened that she could not sleep that night. Early the next morning, I rose and went to the orchards again, but with no more success than before. At last, I met an old gardener who told me it was hopeless. No apples could be had except in the emperor's royal orchard, far away in the city of Bansora, because I loved my wife and did not wish her to say I had not tried to please her. I hurriedly changed into my traveling clothes. Having told my wife what I intended, I set off at once for Bansora. I pressed on so swiftly that in 15 days I returned home with 3 apples, each bought for a gold coin. There were only 3 apples in the royal orchard, and the gardener would not part with them for any lower price. I gave the apples to my wife as soon as I got home, but her craving had passed. She merely took one and put it aside. She was still ill, and no healing seemed to cure her. A few days after I returned from Bansora, while sitting in my shop, a fine place that sold silks and all manner of cloth, I saw a great, fierce-faced black slave enter. Holding an apple, I recognized at once as one of the 3 I had brought from Bansora. There could be no doubt. There were no apples to be found elsewhere in Baghdad or the neighboring regions. I called to the slave. "Tell me, friend," I said, "where did you get that apple?" He smiled and answered, "This is a gift from my mistress. I visited her today. She was feeling poorly." Seeing 3 apples beside her, I asked how they had come by them. She said an honest, simple fellow, her husband, had journeyed for 15 days to bring them to her. We ate together lightly. Before I left, I took this apple. The slave's words drove me mad with jealousy. I sprang up, shut my shop, and ran straight home, bursting into my wife's room. First, I looked for the apples. Seeing only 2, I demanded where the 3rd one was. My wife turned towards where the apples had been, saw only 2, and coldly said, "My dear, I do not know where it is." From that answer, it was not hard for me to see that the slave's tale was true. In a frenzy of jealous rage, I drew the knife I always wore at my girdle and plunged it into the poor woman's throat. I cut off her head, dismembered her body, wrapped the pieces, and put them into a lidded basket, sewing it up with a red thread. I placed the basket in a chest, shouldered it, and waited until nightfall to throw it into the river Tigris. My 2 little children were asleep then. The eldest had gone elsewhere and was not at home. When I returned, I found him sitting by the door, sobbing as though his heart would break. I asked why he wept. He said, "Father, this morning I took an apple without my mother knowing. I kept it a while, but while I was playing on the street with my 2 younger brothers, a tall slave came by and snatched it from my hand and ran off. I chased after him, calling that it was my mother's apple, that you had spent 15 days on the road to bring it to her, but he would not give it back. He struck me and fled through winding streets until I lost him. I could not catch him. Ever since, I have wandered the streets waiting for you to return, so I might beg you not to tell my mother, for I feared it would make her worse. At that, the child wept still more bitterly. His words pierced me with a sorrow that cannot be told. I perceived at last what a monstrous crime I had committed. But remorse came too late. Why had I believed the lying tale of a wretched slave? As my son related it, the slave had invented that wicked story, and I had taken it for truth. Just then, my old cousin, the very old man who had been brought here today, came to visit his daughter. But his daughter was no more. I told him everything, leaving nothing out. Before he could condemn me, I confessed that I was the vilest of murderers. But he could not bring himself to scold me. He wept with me. For 3 days, the two of us wept together. He mourned his dear child. I mourned my beloved wife, whom I had slain so cruelly, because I had believed the lies of a slave. Oh, leader of the faithful, that is the whole of my sincere confession. Now that your majesty knows every detail, I humbly beg you to pronounce sentence. Whatever punishment you decree, however severe, I will not plead for mercy. It will be too light for my guilt. The emperor was astonished at the young man's tale. But that wise ruler judged the man more fit for pardon than for punishment, and spoke up for him. This fellow's deed may be forgiven by God and excused by men. The cruel slave was the sole cause of this murder. He is the one who merits punishment. Therefore, the king turned to his vizier. I give you 3 days to find him. If 3 days pass, and you have not discovered the culprit, you yourself shall suffer the penalty in his stead. The poor Vizier Jafar, thinking himself saved at first, was then filled with grief upon hearing the emperor's command. Knowing the king's nature well, he wiped his tears and returned home without protest, certain in his heart that he had but 3 days to live. He felt it impossible to trace the slave's path in a teeming city like Baghdad, where countless black slaves moved about. How could the criminal be identified? Unless God should reveal him as he had once revealed the murderer, there was no hope of escape. He spent 2 days with his family. They gathered and bewailed the severity of the emperor's order. On the 3rd day, the vizier prepared to meet death with the courage of a lifelong upright minister who had no shame on his conscience. He summoned the judges and witnesses to sign his testament, then embraced and kissed his wife and children farewell. The household wept as if the sky itself had burst open. Never had there been a sight more heartrending. At last, an official from the court arrived to say the emperor was anxious for news of him and of the slave whom the emperor had ordered sought. "I have been commanded," said the official, "to bring you before the throne." The worried vizier consented to go with the officer. But as he was about to set out, his youngest daughter, a child of 5 or 6, was brought to him by his servants, that he might kiss and see her one last time. The vizier loved this little daughter dearly. He begged the official to allow him a moment's delay. He took the child up and kissed her again and again. While he kissed her, he felt something under her garment that gave off a sweet scent, and he asked, "My dear child, what have you there?" "Father," she answered, "it is an apple bearing the emperor's seal. The slave Rihan sold it to me for 2 coins. At the words apple and slave, the vizier Jafar gave a cry of mingled amazement and joy. He slipped his hand beneath the child's dress and took out the apple. He had the slave, who stood nearby, brought forward. When the man came, Jafar asked him, "Wretch, where did you get that apple?" "Sir," the slave answered, "I swear I did not steal from you, nor dare to pluck from the royal orchard. The other day, I passed a street where 3 or 4 children were playing, and saw one of them holding this apple. I snatched it from him. The boy chased me, saying the apple was not his, but his mother's, that his father had gone away on purpose for 15 days to bring 3 apples to his wife, and this was one the boy had taken without his mother's knowledge. He begged me to give it back, but I would not listen. I carried it home and sold it to this young mistress for 2 coins. That is the whole tale, sir." The vizier Jafar, still shaken by the wickedness of a single slave capable of causing the death of an innocent woman, and nearly bringing disaster upon himself and his family, led the man before the emperor. He recounted in full the slave's words and the chance by which he had discovered the culprit. The emperor was more astonished than he had ever been. He could not help laughing aloud. Then, taking on a grave air once more, he told Jafar that because the slave had caused such disorder, he must be made an example of and receive his due punishment. But Jafar replied, "Your Majesty, I dare not disobey, yet this man's crime may still be pardoned. I know of a tale even more wondrous concerning a certain vizier of Cairo named Nuareddin Ali and Bereddin Hatsan in the city of Bansora. If your Majesty wishes to hear such tales, I am ready to tell them. If you find them stranger than the story I have just recounted, then I beg you to spare the slave his life "I wish to hear it," answered the emperor. "But you shall have a hard task. I do not believe you can save this slave, for the matter of the 3 apples is already most unusual." Then the vizier Jafar began his tale as follows.